everybody. This is the progress report for this Wednesday, February 16th. Hope you all had a nice Valentine's Day. And we are now...
I heard it was
I want to talk to you about that, Mikey. We did have a nice Valentine's Day, but it was we would have been better if you and Kathy could have joined us. But we are on today to move into the second half of this month of February. It's certainly nice to see the weather's warming up. The sun's shining brighter and longer.
Mud season's coming.
Maple sugar season was already the way.
Yeah, it's going to be a good season this year.
It's going to be a great season.
These temperature fluctuations.
We've had these temperature fluctuations that we need. And I'm going to welcome our guest. It's a guest we're very proud to have, our consumer advocate, Don Kreese. But, Mike, I think you've got something to kick us off.
I try to bring in a video. You know, TV's a visual medium, so, two talking heads is one thing. But here's a couple minutes, kind of ties in with, sets up what we're going to do on the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Akam Raman from the Administration for Children and Families, Office of Community Services. Do you need help with paying your heating and electric bill? February 1st is National Energy Assistance Day. Did you know that the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, also known as LIHEAP, is helping millions of families keep the heat on this winter? Here is Vicki Pretlow to tell you more about LIHEAP.
Thanks, Akam. I'm Vicki Pretlow, also with the Administration for Children and Families, Office of Community Services. In the U.S., millions of households every year report being unable to meet basic household energy needs. LIHEAP can help people maintain continuous, affordable, and safe home heating and cooling services by providing energy assistance. This winter, that can mean hundreds of dollars to help with your heating bill or your delivery fuel costs. LIHEAP also provides crisis assistance with energy-related emergencies and minor home repairs to reduce energy bills. And even if you have only recently experienced a need for support, you can apply for LIHEAP today.
Thank you, Vicki. Visit energyhelp.us to learn more or call the National Energy Assistance Referral Hotline at 866-674-6327.
Just a little public service announcement. Listen, folks, we've had some cold snaps. If you're experiencing any difficulty with your electric or heating, you can contact LIHEAP either nationally there or go online, and the state also has a LIHEAP office as well.
So with that, Mike, and that was a nice intro, I'd like to turn to our guest, Don Kreese. Some time ago, when I was first dealing with the PUC in regard to the Seabrook Nuclear Project, which I spent a long time on that, as Don well knows, the legislature passed a bill which said the duty of the Public Utilities Commission, or what we just abbreviate as the PUC, was to act as an arbiter between the interests of the shareholders of the monopoly utilities and the customers that buy their product, because they don't have any choice about where to buy their product. Now, they have a choice about where they get their energy from, thanks to the Restructuring Act, which Don is not necessarily as much of a fan of as I am, and we can talk about that. But if you are dealing with a monopoly, and we have legal monopolies in this state, they are monopolies because nobody thinks we should string two sets of electric wires to everybody's home. That would be economically foolish. So when you have no choice about who's going to deliver your electricity, you need somebody to represent your interests. And I remember...
if the state could run power lines.
Pardon me?
I wonder if the state could own power lines.
Yeah, in places they do.
Yeah,
we actually have 5 municipal power companies where that happens right here.
Didn't mean to interrupt, but
you know, people tend to forget.
You got me wondering.
It's a good point. And we have a New Hampshire Electric Cooperative, which is owned by its members, so they have some say about what happens with their operations, headquartered in Plymouth, but throughout many parts of the state. But in any event, once you understand that the task of the PUC, as provided by the legislature, has asked the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, to act as an arbiter between the interests of the shareholders of the utilities, they are all privately owned for-profit companies, and the customers, you need to have a counterbalance there. And I always kind of worried about that because, you know, when I was up there it always seemed like the utilities never had a problem with getting really good representation.
Really? I'm surprised.
Lawyers and experts.
Those deep pockets could afford the best lawyers in the state.
Those people can come in, and whatever the result of this, we're going to pay their fees plus a return, because that's the way the utility project works.
Yeah, remind me. I'd like to talk about that thing when we get going.
But the legislature, in its wisdom, said we need to have a counterbalance to this. If the PUC is going to be the arbiter between the shareholders of the monopoly utilities, granted legal monopolies, and the customers, we need to have an advocate representing those customers. And I'm happy to say we have the most outstanding consumer advocate I can remember in my long history in this business of energy policy in New Hampshire, right here with us, and that is H. Donald Crease. And he's in his, how many terms you served on?
I am, I'd say about 3/4 of the way through my second term as consumer advocate.
And I tell you, we could not have a more effective, more capable, more consummate advocate, because he is a very fine lawyer, than Don Crease. And he calls them like he sees them. He's there. He has an independence. He's attached to the PUC, but his office is entirely independent. And this is the guy who's going to help, because this is his legislative requirement. This is what the legislature says he should do, to be the advocate for the residential customers of the monopoly utilities in New Hampshire. And we could not be more favored to have Don Crease with us. Don, I would like to, what have I left out
Welcome
that
to
you'd
the
like
show.
to know about this?
Bob, first of all, thank you for having me again on the Progress Report. It's always a pleasure to come on and talk with you. And you teed it up perfectly. There's a thing in the academic literature about utility regulation, and it's a term called regulatory capture. And it's pretty easy to understand,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
A regulatory agency like the Public Utilities Commission has these long-term relationships with the utilities that they regulate. And the people who work at the utilities, they realize that, and so they romance the regulator. I mean, they don't literally romance the regulator, but they just develop an ongoing working relationship with the people at the regulatory agency. I used to be the general counsel of the PUC, and I used to say that every utility lawyer in the state and every employee of every utility in the state knew the names of my 2 kids and would ask about them all
I'm
the
sure
time.
that's true. That's a vivid image. Thank
Yes.
you.
And so I think what the legislature realized was that if you're going to have a PUC that is supposed to sort of be in the middle and arbitrating the interests of the shareholders on one side and the customers on the other, you need somebody there to romance the PUC on behalf of customers.
Yeah.
And here in New Hampshire, we chose to constitute that office as a representative of the residential customer class.
Yeah.
In other states, there are about 45 states that have somebody that does what I do, and in some states that person represents all customers. That's the way it works over in Maine, for example.
But in New Hampshire, you represent specifically the interests of the residential customers.
Right, and when you think about it, that's everybody, because everybody has a residence.
Even if you're engaged in
And
commerce,
everybody
you go
needs
home somewhere.
electricity, and many of them need natural gas, which is another, monopoly utility that we've
And
authorized. And water, yeah. That's all true. So,
before we go further, just this discussion, I kind of, as we were getting ready for the show, queued up a question, and I think it just fits perfectly right here. You are attached to the PUC, and yet you're tasked with representing the customers. And I'll just relate for the audience the conversation I had with the person I worked for. The first question out of his mouth when I told him we were going to have you on and described what your role was who pays him. And it seems to me like a legitimate question, and it came out of his mouth in a snap. So could no offense meant, but could you just address that question?
Don works for free, didn't you know? He's a pro-publico.
First of all, it's an excellent question, and it's the one I would certainly ask if I didn't know what I did and how I do it. You pay me, you meaning the state's ratepayers. And the way it works technically is that the cost of our office and the cost of the PUC, by the way, is billed to the state's utilities, and the utilities in turn pass that cost on to their customers. So actually, even though I represent the residential ratepayers of the state, it actually is all utility customers, including the commercial ones, that pay the cost of our office, and they also pay the cost of the PUC.
Yeah. Don, I think a lot of people are going to say, you're the consumer advocate, and I don't like the price of my electric bill or my natural gas bill, and I want to do something about it. Should they call you?
Sure. I was originally appointed to my job by Governor Hassan back in 2016, and when she met with me to talk about whether she should nominate me or not, I asked her, what would success look like to you, Governor? How would you know that I was doing a good job? And she said, I would like to get fewer complaints from citizens that they just can't access this whole business of regulating utilities. You know, people are frustrated that they can't influence the PUC. They can't even connect to what the PUC does. So I would like to receive fewer of those complaints so that people feel like they do have some influence on the PUC. And so I like to help customers who want to do that actually feel like they can meaningfully participate in the PUC's processes. And the other thing I should say before we get too farther into this is that my enabling statute, the legislature's words that create my office, actually don't limit me to the PUC. I am literally allowed to appear before any tribunal on the planet where the interests of residential ratepayers in New Hampshire,
which could include the New Hampshire courts and the federal courts.
Could include federal or state courts here in New Hampshire. I just filed an appeal with the state Supreme Court. But more relevantly, I'm active regionally before the body that helps manage the region's electricity grid. And of course, we participate in proceedings at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And that's important because a lot of decisions that affect New Hampshire are made out there beyond New Hampshire under
Because we're in a grid.
Because we're in a grid, and Congress has chosen to assert a lot of the right to regulate electricity, as it should, because it's an interstate business. And as you all know from having taken constitutional law in high school, you know, it's the federal government that regulates interstate commerce.
Can I back up a little bit, because I know that you and Bob are well acquainted with one another, and you've been on the show before, but we neglected to do a very important thing that we do on every show when we introduce a guest. We ask tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, how'd you get to be where you are in New Hampshire? Do you have a family? What's your stake in this? You know, tell us just, we don't want to pry, but tell us a little, make a person.
Well, we do want to pry. That's what we want to do.
Everything that happens is because people do it, and we want to see you as a person.
All right, so I got a great story. I grew up in the New York area, in one of the northern suburbs of New York, and oddly enough, my little form of teenage rebellion was listening to classical music. And I'm still a big Mozart fan, actually, as it happens. And one day I read in the New York Times, this is in maybe 1975 or so, I read in the New York Times that the only all classical music radio station in New York was switching at midnight to rock and roll music. And I thought, well, that's too bad, but it'll be interesting. I was into radio. So I turned on my radio at 5 minutes to midnight, and at midnight the announcer came on, and he said, guess what, everybody? We are not switching to rock and roll music tonight because a feisty citizens group called the WNCN Listeners Guild had obtained an injunction. Because back in those days, if you wanted to take your radio station, which in those days was a license to print money, if you wanted to just switch that over to something else, you had to get the permission of the Federal Communications Commission. And this radio station had done that, but the Listeners Guild didn't like the way that the agency did that, so they went to court and they got an injunction. And you know what? That radio station in New York, WNCN, that gave it another 10 years of life as a classical music station, just because those listeners did that through the regulatory process. Well, that fired my teenage imagination. I thought,
my
wow,
goodness,
like regulation, like what a great thing. I apologize to any Republicans or Libertarians who might be listening, but just this whole idea of regulation just captured my imagination as a teenager. And everything that has happened to me since then other than my family life, of course, has proceeded from there.
Yeah.
And
That's a great origin story.
That is a great story. I never heard that about you, Don. That is a wonderful story, and I'm totally with you on it. I mean, it's just fascinating.
well, broadcasting has been totally deregulated. And by the way, if you open the October, I think 16th, 1978 issue of TV Guide, which at the time was the biggest circulation magazine
Oh,
in the
yes.
country.
Everybody
Certainly
had
was.
one every week.
Right.
you know?
Well, there's and Mary Tyler Moore is on the cover of that issue. Well, there's an article in there that quotes me warning against deregulating broadcasting. That, by the way, is what gave rise to Rush Limbaugh and everything else you hate.
Oh, my
about
gosh.
radio
The
and
abolishment
TV.
of the fairness doctrine, because
Exactly.
you can't
the
have that.
fairness
you know?
doctrine.
Exactly. Well, in that issue of TV Guide that ran in October of 1978, I warned about that, and so now I have the world's biggest I told you so. So, I told you so.
Oh, I don't know. I think I told you so about Seabrook, but
Well, indeed.
I'll compete with you on that.
And I was in college and I was watching what was going on in Seabrook because I went to college over in Vermont at Middlebury, and I had a good friend who grew up in Peterborough, and we followed the 1978 gubernatorial election, which, Bob, as you know, turned on Seabrook and this question of utility regulation. And Governor Hugh Gallen, so Governor Thompson had vetoed the so-called anti-quip bill, and Governor candidate Hugh Gallen said, well, if I'm elected, I will sign that bill into law. And he did that.
Very first thing he signed.
That's right. In 1979, he signed that bill into law.
Quip. I hadn't thought of that.
Quip.
Yeah.
It took a decade.
We got to explain that, or do we?
we
Oh,
can.
don't interrupt the story, though.
So it took them.
It's a great story.
It took them a decade to straighten it all out because it triggered all this litigation. But in 1988, Public Service Company of New Hampshire became the first electric utility since the Great Depression to have to flee into bankruptcy court for protection. And it's all because they stuck obdurately to Seabrook when they should have bailed out of the project. So QUIP, of course, is an acronym that stands for Construction Works
Work in progress, which meant you asked the customers to pay for a facility being
That
built
they're not
by
even getting
a
electricity
monopoly
from.
utility, which you were not getting electricity from at all. You were not getting the service for which you were paying. And that's history that just really redolent with me, of course.
But it's the gift that keeps on giving. I still waive the anti-quip statute in the face of utilities.
It's still in the law.
It's still in the law, and the utilities are still trying to sneak quip into rate base.
They
I'm not
always
going to
do.
tell you which utility's up to that now. It wouldn't be nice of me to do that, but I'll tell you what, its name starts with the letter L.
Hugh Gallen, I remember him so fondly. He was the first Democrat to be elected governor in God knows how long, many, many years, and it was quite an upset. And it was all over this so-called issue of quip, which was asking the customers to front the money to fund the construction of Seabrook after the financial institutions, the bank, the Wall Street lenders shut the lending window. We're out of this. It's too risky. Now, you think about this, folks, and I know I've said this before. Think about this. How do you make an electric utility go bankrupt? They're providing an essential product none of us can do without. They have a monopoly. You can't get it from anybody else. You have to get it from them.
And a cost-plus contract.
And they're on cost plus. They get their cost.
That's gravy.
I mean, how do you achieve bankruptcy for electric utility? So when Don mentioned there's not been a utility bankruptcy, and there were only a few, I think, in the Great Depression, which was the last time it happened. They were not big ones. How do you achieve that? You have to work at it. You have to really work to get the costs so bloated, so out of control.
Well, PSNH paved the way in 1988, but a few other utilities have taken that example and ran with it since then. Although, fortunately, well, here in New England, we had the New Hampshire Electric Co-op and the Vermont Electric Co-op. They sought bankruptcy protection. And then, of course, the big utility bankruptcies since then have occurred in California. Fortunately, far from here.
Or in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, yeah.
With another nuclear project, which is called, whatever it's called, name knows, whoops. And, they defaulted on $24 billion of investment. I mean, it's just astounding how things have changed. Well, Don, it's wonderful you have this institutional memory as I do.
Well, you lived it, Bob.
I lived it.
I had to
lived
learn
it.
it.
I lived it, and you've lived it, but you totally absorbed it. And so we are very, very. It's very interesting. We have somebody with these skills.
You want to take our 30 seconds?
Sure,
We're
why
at,
not?
we're at the 1/3
Sure, why
mark.
not?
We can regroup. I see you looking through your notes. Let's take 30 seconds. We'll regroup and start the conversation all over. And don't forget, folks, 640-603-0991. You're the consumers. He's the consumer advocate. Give him a call.
Yeah. You got a problem with your electric bill? Everybody, this is the progress report for this Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. We're more than halfway through February, folks. It's going to warm up. A lot of snow is going to disappear. And as we look forward to brightening
Go into my
skies and
basement.
longer days, we couldn't have a better person to shed some light on our situation and our energy world than Don Crease, who, to my great approval, has become our consumer advocate and done an absolutely marvelous job in advancing the issues that can ultimately save the customers of New Hampshire of the monopoly utilities, both electric and gas, but mostly electric because everybody has electricity, not everybody has natural gas, a lot of money. And so I think maybe we ought to. Did you have somewhere you wanted to go with this?
Well, I was curious about the nuts and bolts of the whole thing. It is. Bob recites this stuff in his sleep in between snores, but to most people, we think of electricity when we get the bill. How many places does it go? Is it a 3 yet? That kind of thing. So and the PUC, there are advocates. We've had many people on that have worked with it.
They're not your advocates. This is their advocate.
Well, I'm talking about like Sam Evans Brown, who
Well, he's
came
not
out.
on the PUC.
No, I understand that,
Okay,
but what I'm saying is there are people who are involved in that who know more about it. But I got to bet that the average guy doesn't really know a heck of a lot. So can you tell us some of the nuts and bolts? Where does the PUC operate? I assume out of Concord. Is your office? Do you have a staff? Do you have a budget, or is it just you up there plugging away against the monopolies? Tell us a little bit more so that folks who don't know so much about the process will learn a little bit. Like me.
The PUC is located in Concord in the Walker Building, which is a building that's on the grounds of what used to be the state hospital. And our office is adjacent to the offices of the PUC, and adjacent to us and the PUC is the New Hampshire Department of Energy, which is a newly created state agency we can talk about. The Office of the Consumer Advocate is clearly a David and Goliath operation. In addition to me, I have a staff attorney who works for me. I have a legal assistant who works for me, who's basically a paralegal, I guess you would say. And then I have 2 analysts who, they pore over all the PUC filings and try to make sure that the utilities aren't sneaking their way into free money.
Would they do that? I can't imagine.
Well, they are profit-maximizing firms in a market economy, and as Bob pointed out, they have monopolies. So they do try to take advantage of that whenever they can. So basically, it's tiny state agency of 5 people, and we are always the littlest guy in the room. So we have to be very careful about which battles we pick because we can't do everything, and there's always more struggles that we can embark on with the utilities and others. So we do what we can, and I think we achieve real benefits and victories on behalf of ratepayers.
Yeah. That makes me want to talk to the most recent victory, which you were a big participant in. And, you know where I'm going, right?
Yeah, glad we're going there.
Energy efficiency. Yeah, I know. I remember, and I've said this before, Mike's heard it before, and the audience has heard it before. I got to say it again. When I was deciding that Seabrook was not a great idea for nuclear, for an energy supply bulk facility, you know, the alternative was, say, if you don't like nuclear, your choice is either that or coal. I don't like that. But it turned out there was a really good alternative that nobody was thinking about at that time, which is called energy efficiency, which simply means you don't turn down the thermostat, you don't have to wear sweaters, you don't have to, you know, read under dimmer light, but you get the same energy services you need. Nobody consumes energy. They consume the services that energy provides. And the best way to do that is to use the electrons we're generating by our, you know, our pump storage and our renewables and our nuclear, such as we have 2 left, 2 nuclear reactors, and our natural gas, and all of these things, use those electrons to get the same services without needing to generate more capacity, which that is very expensive. And Don, I know you really believe that this is the way to go, and so I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about that. Don't you agree this is the best way to lower costs for our consumers, is to squeeze more power out of every electron that we have, whether it's an electron generator, an electron that we don't need because we have energy efficiency?
Absolutely. For me as consumer advocate, it is the top priority. I truly think it is the most valuable thing that I can deliver on behalf of the constituency that I represent. And Bob, you said it very well. Basically, we don't use energy for its own sake. Like, we need energy to perform other work for us. We need it to heat our homes. We need it to run the motors in our factories. We need it to provide the lights that we use to
keep our beer cold.
And keep our beer cold. And so there's always a cost of the next little bit of energy or the next little bit of work that we need our energy to do. So if we achieve that next little bit of work by just using less energy to produce the same amount of work, then that's money well spent if that little money spent on energy efficiency is cheaper than going out and just acquiring another unit of energy. And it happens that not out to infinity, but for all practical purposes, pretty close to infinity, the cheapest way to meet the next unit of demand for electricity or natural gas or really any kind of heat is by investing in energy efficiency. And over time, we have developed a set of energy efficiency programs that are delivered by our state's utilities. The trade banner is called NH Saves, and we all pay for it on our electric bill. And our natural gas bills. And, you know, nobody likes to see their bills or their rates go up. But the reality is that these energy efficiency programs are subjected to a rigorous cost or benefit cost analysis, and they return net benefits to all customers. So for every dollar or penny that you spend on these energy efficiency charges on your bill, you get more than that back. So it's an excellent public good. And energy efficiency, in contrast to supply side resources, is totally carbon neutral, right? It emits essentially nothing. I mean, maybe the truck that drives the insulation to your house emits a little bit of carbon on the way to your house.
On that day, yeah.
On that day, you know, there's a little bit of embodied energy in some of those products, but very little carbon emissions. And, you know, you can buy, you know, natural gas from Texas, or you can buy electricity produced in Canada. You know, there's any number of we tend to import a lot of our energy, but all the energy efficiency that we create is homegrown, right? It's New Hampshire people who go to work creating the energy efficiency measures that are deployed in our homes and businesses. So it keeps the it keeps the domestic economy of New Hampshire more vibrant than it otherwise would be. Yeah. So it's a total win-win.
And that doesn't even address the individual victories that each of these projects achieves for the family that is impacted by it. And, because that can make a huge difference in their personal kitchen table budget.
Exactly. In that cost-benefit analysis I was just talking about, we don't even think about that. But that's not the icing on the cake. That's the cake, right? Like, if you are smart enough to ring up NH Saves and participate in NH Saves at your home so that you actually become a more energy efficient consumer, then you save even more money on your in your energy costs, and great for you.
And that either brings you so your budget balances, or it gives you a little extra that you can put back in the community. I mean, and to me, there's 1,000 of those going on every time you book these projects.
Absolutely. So, you know, as somebody who likes to deliver good stuff for ratepayers, I'm actually fairly indifferent to what you do with the savings. You know, some people complain sometime, well, it's bad for the environment because if you save a pile of money through energy efficiency, you're just going to go and buy a hot tub and, you know, use up even more energy on that. Well, that would be a problem if I were Sam Evans Brown representing Clean Energy New Hampshire, but I'm not. I'm the state's ratepayer advocate. So if I help you retain more wealth in your bank account and you go out and use it to take a vacation to Hawaii or buy another big TV that you can watch the Super Bowl on, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. So this brings me to the unbelievable situation we had with our Public Utilities Commission, which, you know, you've now pretty well addressed, I think, with the help of many others, that the PUC has adopted a program to advance energy efficiency called the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard. That came about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It was a 3-year program that set specific targets where we're going to meet our goals for increasing energy efficiency. And then the second edition of the next 3-year plan came up, and Don, as a capable lawyer, handled, we brought a bunch of stakeholders. By the way, in the PUC, there's 2 ways you can get things done. You can have a litigated case with, you know, cross-examination and exhibits and lots of transcripts, or you can bring together all the parties that intervene, and the PUC is very generous about letting parties intervene, and you can ask them to sit down and craft an agreement and then present it to the PUC. Say, here, we've agreed on this. We've agreed on this. This should be our goals for energy efficiency for the next 3 years. And that happened with the next 3-year edition of the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard to set goals for where New Hampshire should be in its energy efficiency aspirations. And by the way, we are well behind the rest of New England in doing this. So to have this happen, and I think Dazan deserves great credit for helping to herd these cats. You know, whether it was utilities, low-income advocates, environmentalists, organizations like Clean Energy New Hampshire, which he just mentioned, now led by Sam Evans Brown, and they all came together and they said, here, we want to present this to you, the PUC. This is our program for modestly advancing our goals for energy efficiency. And the PUC said, no. They rejected it. And that raised holy hell. And Don, I'd like you to weigh on this. Have we overcome that? Are we back to where we should be?
Yeah, I think another point to make, though, Bob, before we get to that is, and they offered no alternative.
Yeah.
They sacked the deal and zeroed everything.
Well, right. So, Bob, you actually gave the PUC too much credit, I think, because they didn't just reject the 3-year plan that we all worked so hard to develop, but But first of all, we submitted that plan to them in late 2020, and the idea was that it would cover the years 2021, 2022, and 2023. But 2021
Because the legislature says every 3 years you have to have a new plan.
Right. So we submitted the plan, and it had, the agreement of every party that was participating, and the PUC didn't approve the plan in time for the beginning of the 3-year period. In fact, they waited 316 days. On the 316th day of 2021, that was November 12th, you can do the math, on day 316, the PUC put an order out, and it didn't just say, oh, we don't like your finely crafted, consensus-built 3-year energy efficiency plan. We hate the whole idea. We really think that this whole idea of forcing or requiring ratepayers to pay for energy efficiency and having an energy efficiency resource standard is just bad public policy, and we are reversing course and backing out of this. And what we're going to do over the next 3 years is gradually ramp down energy efficiency so that in the future, if anybody's going to buy any energy efficiency, they're just going to do it in the open marketplace without any thumb on the scale from regulators or without any help from the state's ratepayers. That's what the PUC decided. And when the PUC decided that on November 12th, well, to quote John Milton, all hell broke loose.
I remember that day.
Yes. That's from Paradise Lost. Few people know that.
Yes.
So, well, we filed an appeal. There are now 4 appeals of that Public Utilities Commission order pending.
And the appeal goes right to the Supreme Court. There's no half measures here. If you're going to appeal from this board, you had better be a constitutional attorney who can go to the Supreme Court and make the appeal.
Well, it is the New Hampshire Supreme Court, which is
understood. But it's still you don't go to a district court or a superior court. You go right up to the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Yes, that's what we did, and there are 3 other appeals pending of the same order. So we got in there first, and we did that because we wanted to ask the court to stay the PUC's order because it is reducing the energy efficiency rates. So we got in there, we did that, 4 appeals pending. Just today, the legislature has finally passed a bill that is essentially going to overrule the PUC and restore the NH Saves programs back to where they were last year and the year before. So that's really great news. It is a stunning rebuke to the Public Utilities Commission, which richly deserves that rebuke. Now, you're laughing at me because
this is not the PUC reversing course. It's seeing the better light and reversing course. It's the legislature is now going to step in and by law force them to
right.
change course.
The legislature the governor has already promised to sign the bill, so the legislature is telling the PUC it was wrong, and if there's anything left over after that, we're going to keep pressing our appeals, and the New Hampshire Supreme Court is going to tell the PUC that it can't just do whatever the heck it wants. It has to make decisions based on an orderly process. It has to consider the actual evidence presented to it.
The record of evidence.
They can't just make it up. They just made it up.
Well, let me ask this: I want to know who are these people? How do you get on the PUC? Do you have to be a judge? Are you appointed for a term? Is it a lifetime appointment like a judge? Tell me a little bit about that. And I know you have to go in front of them, so I'm not asking for any dirt. But
well, right.
Just tell me the.
Remember, I said earlier, my job is to capture the PUC, right? So I'm really
read a love letter to the PUC by describing them.
Well,
in all seriousness, they're appointed by the governor, I presume. I presume they have set terms. They're staggered.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about
One
that.
has to be a lawyer.
There are 3 PUC commissioners. One of them has to be a lawyer. They have 6-year terms. The terms are supposed to be staggered. There's been a lot of upheaval and turnover at the PUC in the last few years. We finally, again, as of a few weeks ago, have a full 3-person commission serving at the PUC. And one of the PUC commissioners is a former member of our staff at the Office of the Consumer Advocate, so that's good news. And
And I presume that to be appointed by the governor, and I'm presuming confirmed by the Senate.
Executive Council.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, the Executive Council. I'm in New Hampshire. I mean, these aren't slouch people. You have to have some expertise. You're not bringing someone in who doesn't have expertise in the area, like a Bob Backus, for example, who might
Well,
make an excellent
you
public
have to
utilities
be
commissioner?
nominated by, there's a residential ratepayers advisory board that vets candidates, recommends 3 of them to the governor. The governor is supposed to pick one of them, and that's how we get a consumer advocate. When you're talking about PUC commissioners, all you have to be is somebody nominated by the governor and confirmed by the executive council. So and this isn't a problem unique to New Hampshire. There are plenty of people who've been appointed utility regulators who have no relevant experience. And yes, I have seen that happen here in New Hampshire.
You know, this PUC decision was such a bolt out of the blue. It just is just astounding. I can't think of another example. Maybe you can, Don, but I can't think of another example where parties with such diverse interests, as I say, utilities, low-income advocates, environmentalists, your office, came together and said, this looks like a good program to us, and they did just accept it, maybe with conditions, but turned it down flat. Has it ever happened like that before that you can recall?
I've never seen it. It's the worst regulatory decision I have ever read, seen, or heard of. Somebody once asked me to describe at a cocktail party, like, what do you do, Don? And I described it for them. And this was a doctor, and he listened to me and he said, oh, I get it. You enforce the laws of physics. And that's true. And here is the law of physics that applies to this situation. It's the law that says that everything has an equal and opposite reaction. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, the PUC made this abysmal decision on November 12th, and it has had a exciting boomerang effect where, like, everybody now understands and is crusading on behalf of the value of our energy efficiency programs. You'll love this, Bob. Even the Business and Industry Association, which for years has been a rabid opponent of stuff like this, even they, in the latest edition of the New Hampshire Business Review, they have an op-ed that talks about how important our energy efficiency programs are.
I did not know that. That's
And
really good
so
to hear.
what
I mean, the networks are forming. That's great news.
Right. So, the Home Builders Association, the Business and Industry Association, both caucuses in the legislature, both parties, like, there is now all this momentum behind making sure that we continue to have ratepayer-funded energy efficiency. And that's how the legislature passed that bill today that is going to undo what the PUC did.
Well, let me ask a question. You described the PUC as the arbiter between the ratepayers and
Shareholders.
the shareholders. And an arbiter typically, I'm thinking of a court where they have rules of procedure. You can do either the agreement or you can do a full trial-like situation. But they arbitrate based upon rules and regulations. This sounds more like a policy decision that the policy of energy efficiency was bad. Are they really supposed to be determining policy? Or is it?
Oh, that's
That's an interesting question. So that's a 300 level question, right?
It certainly is.
And my answer to that question is
Forgive
actually,
me for it, but it presented itself.
I don't know if Bob will agree with me, but my answer to that question is yes. So the PUC is considered a quasi-judicial decision-making body. So it's not a court. It acts like a court in many ways, but I think PUC commissioners do have a great deal of policy latitude, and so you can expect over time that the PUC is going to reflect the policy preferences of the governor because he's appointing the commissioners. So in some sense, if you don't like the PUC, then you need to elect a different governor. But within the context of that policy discretion that a utility regulator has, they still have to act like a court and make decisions in an orderly, fair way. There's still a thing called due process. They still have to base their decisions on evidence. They can't do stuff that's crazy. They can't act according to whim. They can't just make it up. And that is the problem with the decision the PUC made about energy efficiency back in November. And, I've taught administrative law, and I can tell you that this is a textbook example of how not to do administrative law.
Now, they have
And
counsel.
I have to say, I think Governor Sununu should get some. I mean, I guess he's a popular governor. He's obviously going to run for re-election, probably prohibitively favored to win another term. But he should be raked over the coals for his PUC appointments. I mean, for these people to reject this broadly based, stakeholder-approved agreement is just appalling. And he appointed people with no relevant experience to the PUC, and they do have important policy roles to play, as Don just mentioned. I'm not going to ask Don everything because he's not a political creature, but that's my take on it. I think the governor deserves to get roasted for these appointments at this PUC. One of whom, the day after the order was signed, resigned and went off to get another job, by the way.
Well, actually, it's even worse than that. This was the former chairwoman of the PUC. She put that order out. There were only 2 PUC commissioners at the time on November 12th. And she put that order out on her. She resigned to take a job with a different part of the government. So she tendered her resignation. Her last day was November 12th. They put that order out at 7:21 p.m. on her last day. She literally had one foot out the door as that order was being issued, and she disappeared into the void. She's out of the utility regulation business now.
She certainly is. She's working in the judicial branch these days.
Oh, great.
There you go. Let's take another quick break here, Mike.
I think we could regroup.
And by the way, folks, I hope we'd have some calls. 640-3091 with the 603 in front. We all have to do that now. By the way, I'm surprised there wasn't an opposition to that. When they were going to split New Hampshire into 2 different area codes,
I'm opposed.
There
is opposition.
There was a total
officially.
opposition, and it ended. And the PUC ended it. But anyway, call us in, 603.
Did the PUC have something to do with that? Can I get my area code back?
Nope.
And we'll be right back with the final segment of this edition of the Progress Report. We're very pleased to have our guest here, Don Kreis. We'll be right back. So we're back. This is the third and therefore final segment of this week's edition of the Progress Report, and we are very pleased to welcome our very, very well-talented and energetic consumer advocate, Don Kreis. We've been talking about the disastrous decision of the PUC on November 12th. A year ago, right? 2021, was it?
Well, they waited 316 days. They were supposed to make their decision at the beginning of 2021. 316 days go by, and then last November 12th, they made this horrible decision.
This horrible decision, which was followed immediately by the resignation of one of the 2 commissioners, supposed to be 3. The other one is still there and is now the acting chairman. And there are other very great concerns for our consumer advocate. One is the Electric Assistance Program. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. Well, so this goes back to the little PSA with which we started, and that was talking about the LIHEAP program. That's a fuel assistance program that's funded by the federal government. And then in addition to that, there's a thing called the Electric Assistance Program, and that is a program that helps people pay for their electric bills if they're having trouble affording them. And if you would like to avail yourself of that program, you should call your local community action agency, and here in Manchester, that would be Southern New Hampshire Services. Well, characteristic of the PUC, what happens is, there's a working group, and so by consensus, there was an agreement about the budgets for this winter to cover the Electric Assistance Program. The budgets were submitted in due course, and the PUC decided that it didn't like the budgets and was going to withhold approval for them, so they let the programs kind of limp into the winter. And now they've opened a whole proceeding to try to, I think the PUC is intending to scale back the Electric Assistance Program because it just doesn't approve of that kind of help for poor people. And so we are busy, we're busy defending the program in the face of what I think is a pretty hostile incursion. And, again, it's of a pattern with the way the PUC handled energy efficiency. They waited a long time. Finally, I shamed them a few weeks ago. It happened to be the morning after the coldest night of the winter, and we happened to be having a PUC hearing, and I said, look, you should be ashamed of yourself. I mean, this is the coldest morning of the winter, and you've still withheld approval for the budget. And I talked about Mozart that day, too. I said, have you ever seen, Mozart wrote this opera called Don Giovanni, right? And at the very end of Don Giovanni, the title character, because of his immorality, is consumed by the flaming hot fires of hell. And then I said, and if you don't approve these energy efficiency, these electric assistance program budgets, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to you, but I can't rule it out either. I said that.
That's a form of argument that I have not seen before, but I like it. I like it. I want to study under you.
Well, so the PUC, right from the bench, said, all right, we'll approve the budgets, but we're going to take a big look at this, and we might do something different next year, so when next winter rolls around.
Are there no deadlines? I mean, you're talking about 316 days of delay without an opportunity to come in. I mean, if there's a problem with it, bring people in, have the discussion.
Why is there a penalty for not making their own deadlines?
It's a problem. I think it's a flaw in the way the PUC is constituted. I mean, if you just don't do your job, what happens? The state police don't come and arrest you.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose eventually the governor and council would step in and say, you're not doing your job, so you're out. But there needs to be some accountability. I was the general counsel of the PUC for a while, and my mantra was, we are an order factory. People need decisions from us. That's why they appear here. And our job is to get them those decisions as quickly and efficiently as possible. And if we make a wrong decision, then somebody will tell us, either the court or the legislature.
I'm thinking of my time in the legislature, Bob. I'm sure you'll agree. I mean, there were X number of bills, and they had to be processed. And some days you had to stay past midnight because they had to be processed. There was no, we'll get to it later. And I'm just appalled that to hear that anything can linger. I stayed up
one night till 3 a.m.
I mean, for any aspect of our government to hold a decision for 316 days without looking for new information or part of something going on, it's disgraceful.
Yeah.
Excuse me, you can't say that, but I can.
Oh, I'll say it. It's disgraceful. Yeah, it was appalling. And then when they made such a bad decision on day 316, it was even more appalling.
Oh, I'm surprised. I've never been a fan of the Public Utilities Commission, and I'm going to walk out of this conversation less enamored of them.
Okay, but let me be fair. Okay,
let's be fair.
Governor Sununu has recently appointed, and the Executive Council has recently confirmed 2 new PUC commissioners. So 2 of the 3 PUC commissioners are people who have deep backgrounds in utility regulation. One of them, Pradeep Chattopadhyay, used to work for me, so I know he understands what the ratepayers need. The other one is Carlton Simpson. He was a lawyer who worked for one of the utilities, but also a very experienced, knowledgeable, level-headed, smart utility lawyer.
This is complicated stuff. I certainly wouldn't want to waltz in there and start making decisions. You can't just pull anybody off the street.
I was very pleased to see those 2 nominations. I think they were good choices by Governor Sununu. I commend the Executive Council for having confirmed them, and I am looking forward to better days ahead for the PUC.
Yeah.
Well, that's good news.
What's your own personal agenda going forward? You're in your 2nd term, right?
Yes.
And very distinguished service, may I say. But what are your major goals to achieve in the remainder of your term, and maybe a 3rd term if you so choose?
Well, I'm thinking seriously about seeking a 3rd term.
I'm glad to hear that.
Lots and lots of stuff to be accomplished. It's a fabulous job that I love doing, and we have all kinds of things in the future. So we need to shore up our energy efficiency programs so that we manage to get closer to what the other states are doing. As you said before, we're dead last in the region, and we might always be kind of lagging behind some of the other states, but we shouldn't be so far behind.
We shouldn't lag at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, why is that? I don't think we should lag.
I don't think so either, but New Hampshire
traditionally does.
Well, right. It's traditionally a cautious, incremental state when it comes to public policy. So, that's okay, I guess I would say. We have a lot of work to do in terms of prodding our utilities to adopt all the technology we need, but only the technology we need. Bob, you mentioned electric restructuring the other day, and you think we have a difference of opinion about restructuring, but we don't really. As I think I've already said on this program, my attitude about restructuring is exactly the attitude that was attributed to Gandhi when they asked him what he thought of Western civilization. And he said, right, we should give it a try sometime. Well, that is my attitude about electric restructuring. I mean, yes, we made the electric utilities sell off their generation assets, right?
Yeah.
And customers paid dearly for that, hundreds of millions of dollars in stranded costs. But the idea was that customers would be empowered to make meaningful choices about where they get their energy from.
Yeah.
That has happened for big commercial customers. It has not happened for residential customers.
I was going to say there was a period of time when a lot of residential customers were migrating away from the default service, which is the term for the product you get from the utility that serves you with wires and distribution when you don't make another choice. But I'm not sure that's still happening. There's
less and less migration. The companies that want residential customers are the bottom feeders, so there's data that suggests that you don't do any better by migrating. But we have this new policy option out there called community choice aggregation.
Yeah, that's a subject for a whole program we should do.
Well, so I'm very committed to making sure that gets implemented properly so that your municipality becomes your buying agent when it comes to electricity.
We should do that in Manchester.
Very excited about that. And then there is all kinds of reform that we need at the regional and federal level.
Yeah.
Our electric grid is run by a nonprofit organization called ISO New England, and it is you might be old enough to remember this. Back when J.P. Morgan kind of ran the American economy from a oak-paneled room on Wall Street while sitting around with his fellow Wall Street titans smoking cigars. That's kind of how we run the regional electric grid, and it's bad for consumers. And so we need to reform ISO New England, its governance, and the so-called stakeholder advisory body it has called NEPOOL.
Which you're part of.
Right, and we need to open that up to sunshine. Yeah. And so there's lots more work to be done there. Yeah. So
I'm convinced.
We got so much more to
let's do that other show, Bob.
We got to do that other show. I mean, the whole ISO New England thing is a big thing. The whole restructuring thing and its legacy is a big thing. But that leads me into something, Don. I don't know. I got to do this. I just finished this book called The Upswing by Robert Putnam, who wrote the book much known called Bowling Alone. And it's about the whole transition from the period of the previous Gilded Age, which is all about I, me, and how we got out of that into the Progressive Age. We passed 4 constitutional amendments, substantive ones, and got the income tax and direct election of senators, and then how we got into the communitarian era of the New Deal and World War II, when it was all about we. And now we're back in an I period again. This guy's going to be speaking at St. Anselm, your alma mater, on March 28th. I'm certainly going to be there. And I think that's what we're seeing kind of with the kind of things we've been talking about here.
Speaking of speaking, I do want to point out that the My Pillow guy is speaking right now as we speak in downtown Manchester, and at an event open only to Republican state reps.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay. You had one more thing you wanted to do here, didn't you?
No, I'm good. I
thought you had another quick video you wanted.
Oh, we'll save that for another time. We'll save that for another time.
Don, it's been terrific for you to be here with us. We can't tell you how much we appreciate what you bring to not only this show, but to your job every day with your passion, commitment, expertise, and knowledge, and deep philosophical underpinnings to what you do. It's just absolutely terrific. So we really, really appreciate it, and we got a lot more to go forward here. But I certainly hope that, I think, lots of times people in government, I think, when they really make a difference. This is a man who really makes a difference. And by the way, I started out by asking, if you got a problem with your electric bill, should you call Don? Yeah, you should in a sense, but they also have people at the PUC. If you have an individual problem, you deal with problems on the residential sort of wide area, don't you?
Well, I represent residential customers as a group.
As a group, that's
their
what I was trying to
collective
say.
interests.
Yeah.
And if you're having an individual problem with your electric bill, we've reshuffled everything a bit lately, so that the people you should call is the Consumer Services Division of the Department of Energy, and they have a team
that's
of
new.
right. They have a team of people who they're basically caseworkers, and they can help you resolve your individual dispute with your utility. That said, if you call me, I'll talk to you for sure.
Yes, he does. I call him often, and he always talks to me.
Well, with
which is
that,
a pleasure.
we've got to wrap up. We've got
We
folks
gotta wrap
coming in
up.
to take our seats, Bob. So
Yeah. Thank you, Don, for being with us and for what you do. May it long continue.
see you next week, folks.
See you next week with another edition of the Progress Report.